Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at another excellent practitioner guide from Law Brief Publishing. This one is a practical guide to the Landlord and Tenant Act 1954 and dealing with commercial tenancies. And it's been written by Richard Hayes and David Sawtell. As I say, Law Brief Publishing produce a very useful stable of books for us as practitioners, mainly initially involved in PI, personal injury, but this one of course is Landlord and Tenant. And for anybody who's a common law barrister such as myself, these books are a boon without a doubt. Now, I've given the title for our review, Great Practical Advice Guides for Practitioners from Law Brief Publishing. Bit of a straightforward statement of fact there, but in fact that's exactly what you're getting. Let's have a look at the book first of all anyway. It's only a small book and it's not expensive. Paperback, there we go, nice blue cover. There's the spine, you can't see much on that. Then there's a little bit at the back, and then there's some photographs of some of the other books in the actual series that they've published. Looking at the back of the book first, you can see some of the detail right on the last page. That's more the actual books that the Law Brief Publishing Company actually produce. That's, as I say, a lot of them are on PI. Then you've got what you've got at the back is some appendices, which is on notices under the Landlord and Tenant Act itself. Then we get from that to a conclusion on the future of the 1954 Act, which is worth reading, again talking about the Law Commission and so forth. We go to the front of the book. We've got details about the authors there, both barristers from Lamb Chambers. There's the front page. You can see a little bit of information about them there. And there's a nice little, let me get to it, a nice little dedication, which I'll show you there. You can read that just for a moment. There's a nice dedication. I always like to show those. I don't put them in the review itself, but the dedication is very important because a lot of people are involved. There's a basic blurb about the book itself there. Then you get on to the contents section. You see how it's structured. It's easy to read. It's a very good facility to have this. There's the introduction, a little bit of Latin. I think whichever one it was now, I can't remember which one it was, but one of the Lord Chancellors did not like us using Latin. In fact, this is not Latin, it's actually French. L'Angleterre est une nation de boutiquières, shopkeepers. A commonly attributed statement from Napoleon Bonaparte. There we go. Introduction. So it wasn't Latin, and it was Lord Irving as well, but it wasn't Latin, sorry. So I apologise for that. Right, there's the introduction. You've got all of that stuff there. And in fact, the introduction is quite good because it's got some definitions. Now, if someone's relatively new to this area, let's say a relatively newly qualified barrister or solicitor, I think it would be useful to know of the existence of the book because it does give you some basics on the sort of hands-on approach to what you have to do with landlord and tenant on commercial tenancies. I've certainly had some work in this area, and initially it can be a little bit confusing. So this is, especially when you're looking at things like the white book, so it is actually very useful to have something like this. There's the detail there. You can see there are no footnotes, but you do have useful case law, which is stated. One thing you haven't got, of course, is an index of the cases at the front, which would have been helpful, and I think an index at the back would have been helpful. However, you've still got the usual, you've actually got here the sort of questions that your client's going to ask you. For instance, Chapter 13, Ground B, persistent delay in paying rent, a fairly common one. Now remember what we're talking about, commercial tenancies. Well, let me talk about the book, and I've borrowed from it some of the statements that are contained in the marketing blurb, which you'll see on the web. I've done that mainly because when we have it published, sometimes people won't know anything about the book, so it's useful to have a statement as to exactly what it is. Anyway, what we've got here is this. Law Brief Publishing provide a full range of practical day-to-day legal guides for practitioners and unrepresented parties, and we welcome this new title on Landlord and Tenant concerning premises occupied for business purposes. The paperback is in fact a most useful short review of the working of the Landlord and Tenant Act as it affects commercial tenancies, and the authors are both barristers, Richard Hayes and David Sawtell from Lamb Chambers. The mission is to give us as practitioners and those in business seeking quick and concise information on the 1954 Act, and that's just what you get here. Now, as the lawyers say, the Landlord and Tenant Act is by far the most important piece of legislation affecting premises occupied for business purposes. Therefore, the guide fills in what we think is a nice gap in the knowledge of many business people who probably have a rather sketchy knowledge of the statute itself. And again, in this day and age, I think it's very useful to have these books because there are a lot of litigants in person, and that includes companies, of course. Now, and also, quote, a good understanding of the workings of the Act is vital for anyone advising landlords or tenants of business premises. So the guide gives the best short account of the Act in our view. And of course, when I say advisors, I'm not talking now just about lawyers. I could be talking about company secretaries or anybody involved, because it's an expensive business going to a lawyer, and this information may well help you initially decide what you're going to do with a particular problem that you're faced with. And of course, we're most fortunate to have Hayes and Sawtell as the authors of this guide, because they're both experienced counsel with specific expertise in a specialist field, which is what this is. And make no bones about it, it's not as easy as you would think of the legislation itself. The aim, of course, of the authors is to produce, quote, a comprehensive one-stop shop practical guide to the 1954 Act and associated areas of practice, covering this important piece of legislation. And that's exactly what you're getting here. The guide covers the following areas, and I'm going to list them just in case you are, depending on what you're looking for. The Act applies excuse me, let me start again. With the areas, it starts with when the Act applies, how to contract out of the Act, claims for a new tenancy or termination thereof are brought, together with the detailed guidance as to the court procedures required by the CPR, which of course is in the White Book. Detailed practical guidance to all the grounds on which a landlord may seek to resist a claim for a new tenancy, with treatment obviously of recent case law. And I think the mention of the recent cases is quite useful here. Now, the paperback also includes guidance as to the technical areas of claims for an interim rent, notices under the Act, and guidance in relation to services, also in addition, claims for compensation for improvements under the legislation. That's in fact the Landlord and Tenant Act 1927. It also covers dilapidations, which is actually an important area, one of which I've been involved in because it does overlap there with other areas, and termination at common law. Let me conclude by saying this. I found this book very easy to read because it's very much like all of the law brief publishing titles. You can browse them, obviously the titles on the website, but they are, I think, a great help to us. Obviously, if you need something much more detailed, you're going to have to go to the notes in the White Book, and you may well have to go to other more detailed works, even the loose leaf works. But I do think it's of some help, because what Law Brief Publishing are doing is they're publishing books which are expanding in many areas at the moment, and they're likely to be, I think, an invaluable guide for solicitors, barristers or surveyors working in this particular area, as well as, of course, the business community and members of institutes like the Expert Witness Institute, because again, you could have surveyors who would use this book and might need to have some additional information, because one assumes a lot sometimes as a lawyer about what people do and don't know. The difficulty is quite often they don't know, and there's no reason why they should know. So that's why they come to people like us, and obviously we are meant to know, and we try our best to fathom some of the more interesting workings of some of the pieces of legislation we have on the statute book. We feel then that the publishers give Tremendous support to public legal education, which continues, of course, to see its profile rising at a time of substantial legal aid cuts. And again, this is one area where I do feel, as unrepresented parties have really expanded dramatically in recent years. It's an area where you're getting a service, and so for the unrepresented party, I think it'll be the boon that we said is in austere times that we live in at the moment. And of course, the state expects us to know our legal rights and obligations, and you're going to get them here. So a big thank you to all the people involved in this book. The actual book was published on the 20th of September 2017, and I'm recording this just in the autumn itself. Let's have a look at the book again very quickly. There it is. And then the spine, and then the back. We put it in the journals and on the web, this review, so you should be able to see it. Chapter 17, Ground F. Landlord intends to demolish or reconstruct the premises. Here we go. It sets out what the terms are, the intention. It gives you a case, which will be a leading authority, and again a few more authorities dealing with any queries. Fixed and settled intention, reasonable prospects, etc. All the usual words there. Planning permission, that crops up a lot, and so forth. Time when the work will take place, and so forth. So again, very, very important. That bit could well be very helpful for the construction bar, for instance. But as I say, you've got a wide area here of expertise at your fingertips. So a big thank you to everybody concerned for producing this excellent new book. Bye-bye.